Hello, and thanks for joining us for the Farming Today podcast. I'm Kaz Graham, and in this episode, the computer says no. Why nearly 4,000 farmers are excluded from the government's new environmental support schemes.
Common land is large areas of land, and what this means is that the computer system can't cope, and so the government have taken a decision not to allow any common land to apply for the sustainable farming incentive. Otherwise, when everybody else is applying for schemes, the computer falls to pieces.
More on that a little later, but we start with beans. We're looking into how the food our farmers grow is processed all this week. And most of the beans and peas that we grow for human consumption in the UK pass through just one large processing company. It's called Askew and Barrett. It's based outside Wisbech in Cambridgeshire, and Sheila Dillon met Justin Barrett at the factory for this week's edition of the Food Programme.
We're sitting at this table. We're going to go out into the factory in a minute. And there are lots of samples. There are jars of marifats and maples and green and blues, and I don't even know what those are, and pink beans and green peas. So explain what we've got in front of us.
Okay, so I just put it on the table. I put a few little things. We do a few more niche crops, like we do maple peas. One variety, a variety called Rose, tends to go over to Asia. They use them for confectionery. And they make jams out of them, and they make confectionery items, which is obviously very different to the Western palate. We do faba beans. Now, faba beans are traditionally eaten in the Middle East. Sudan, also, they're reasonably large takers from the UK. Then the traditional is the marifat, and marifats are going through the factory today, so you'll see them.
Okay, shall we go and look at the factory
then?
Sure.
Yeah. Stuart's going to come with us. He's our technical manager.
Because pea and bean processing is a very noisy business, we couldn't record in most of the factory buildings. It was only in the final building that we could easily talk and get an explanation of the vast and actually quite thrilling processing we'd seen of marifat peas. Okay, well, we're in the warehouse, which is phenomenal. I mean, it really is like an aircraft hangar, but it's full of, I don't know what you call those bags, plastic.
So they're one-ton tote bags.
One-ton tote bags of marifat.
It goes up through an elevator to come down through various pieces of equipment. We've got screen graders in there to take out anything that's too big and too small. We've got gravity separators, which use aeration to grade by weight. We've got needle drums that have been used since the 30s and 40s, which look like a big washing machine, have lots of needles that all point the same way, and they're looking for cracked skins or insect damage to pulses, and then they get carried all the way around to the top, and then a brush strip and inversion of the needles carries them off into the waste. We've got optical sorters, which are looking for a colour range in peas and beans and taking out anything that's outside of that. Metal detection, removing stainless steel, ferrous and non-ferrous metals down to about 1.2 millimetres. We've got an X-ray that will take out ceramic, glass and any residual metal that's left alone down to about 4 millimetres in size. Then a robot bagger, which bags everything in 12.5 or 25 kilos onto a pallet, so every pallet looks exactly the same and is as good as we can possibly get it out the door.
It's an astonishing process. I mean, it's astonishing to walk through that. Is most of that machinery old-fashioned? I mean, would it have been done that way 50, 60, 80 years ago, or is there new techniques?
So the problem with the new techniques is, like the optical sorter, there is a measure of losing good peas out of the process when we remove the bad peas, because it uses compressed air. To do it at that speed, it has to. Whereas the needle drums, which have been done that way for a number of years, only can take out bad peas because they have to have a reason that the needles have caught them. So there is a measure of offset between working at speed or getting the consistency that we want from the machinery. That's why we use both.
You know, before we came in here, we were talking about the fact that, you know, there's a new interest in beans and peas, but some of the technology to sort and clean is not being made anymore. I mean, I'd love it. You know, everybody in Britain came and did that walkthrough that we just did. I mean, it really is astounding. You know, you'd look at a tin of marifat peas or a packet of them dried and you'd go, wow, this is quite something.
You can hear more from a very enthusiastic Sheila in the food programme later on this morning at 11 here on BBC Radio 4, or catch up later on BBC Sounds. Scottish seed potato growers have been gathering in Dundee this week to hear how a 5-year project might save their industry from the impact of potato cyst nematode, or PCN, a tiny worm which, if found on the land, makes it ineligible for growing seed potatoes. Now, seed potatoes are the tubers that you use to grow new potatoes from, and the seed potato industry is worth more than £100 million to Scotland. But with PCN-infested land expanding, some scientists have issued warnings over the future viability of the industry. Nancy Nicholson met the project lead, Dr. James Price, in the Commonwealth Potato Collection, a temperature-controlled glasshouse where heritage potato plants are stored.
Potato cyst nematodes came from South America. They were then distributed across the world. But these wild species of potatoes that we can see here, they have been exposed to potato cyst nematodes for years and years. They've evolved with the pathogen. And so we can use new tools that we've developed on our project to identify resistance genes, identify how those resistance genes are interacting with the pathogens, and then we can hopefully breed them into commercial varieties that our growers will then be able to use and manage their potato cyst nematode problem.
That is a longer term solution, obviously. What can farmers themselves do?
The responsibility for PCN management stays cross-sector. We need the supermarkets to be accepting resistant varieties, we need the packers and processors to be using resistant varieties, and we need the growers to understand how to deploy those resistant varieties.
So the industry can be saved. The fear is that it only has a 30-year lifespan left.
I would say that 30-year lifespan is expanding already. We've seen through our project over the last 5 years the amount of resistant varieties that are being planted and already accepted across the industry has massively increased. And now about 15% of all the varieties we grow in Scotland are resistant to one of the species of potato cyst nematode, and about 60% are resistant to the other main species of potato cyst nematode. So it's a huge step in the right direction.
We've come into an office here at the Hatton Institute now, and Kerry Leslie is here. She's a potato consultant with SAC. And Kerry, you've been working with farmers on a PCN scenario planner. In a nutshell, what does it do?
So the PCN Scenario Planner is a free web-based tool which allows you to forecast PCN risk and potential yield loss caused by PCN in your field.
And you've been doing workshops with agronomists and farmers recently. How engaged are they? How useful do they think it's going to be?
Uptake and interest in the model has been really good. There was a lot of appetite for something like this.
How much difference do you think it'll make, James, to the long-term problem of PCN?
For any seed potato growers who have potentially lost land to PCN, using the model like this will help them understand how to manage that population, reducing it down and ultimately returning a negative test, meaning that they've removed the PCN from that field.
And they can grow seed tatties again.
Exactly.
James Price ending that report from Nancy Nicholson. Farmers who graze their livestock on what's called common land in England are being excluded from the government's new farming environmental support schemes, not because they don't qualify, but because the Rural Payments Agency's computer system isn't up to the job of processing their applications. They're not allowed to apply on paper or by email, and the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs has told the Foundation for Common Land, which represents commoners as they're known, that there's no guarantee there'll be any change this year or next. Julia Aglenby is the Executive Director of the Foundation for Common Land, and she's been telling me about the kinds of farms being affected.
There are about 3,900 farming businesses that have common rights in England, and there's a huge range of farming businesses. The vast majority of them are in the uplands, and we're talking about small upland farms that may have about 100 hectares of inside land, and then they have a similar amount of land on the open common. So these are the places where people love going on holiday. If you're doing the Wainwrights in the Lake District, we're talking about Blencathra, we're talking about Helvellyn, we're talking about the Dartmoor Tours if you're down in the southwest and Exmoor. And then if you love places such as the New Forest, there are 700 commoners in the New Forest. the Yorkshire Dales, the North York Moors. These are the most iconic landscapes of England.
Why can't the RPA, the Rural Payments Agency, take their applications?
Common land is large areas of land. So one field parcel might be 2,000 hectares or 3,000 hectares. And what this means is that the computer system can't cope with data of this size. So for our new environmental land management systems, we have layered these on top of the old computer system that was used for the basic payment scheme. And this system, Abaco Agri, cannot cope. So what the RPA have chosen to do is to turn off all the common land parcels. Otherwise, when everybody else is applying for schemes, the computer literally falls to pieces. And so the government have taken a decision not to allow any common land to apply for the sustainable farming incentive or the countryside stewardship higher tier because the computer says no.
Spell out briefly what not being able to apply for these support schemes means for those farmers who graze on common land.
Until a few years ago, farmers who were commoners received support from the government in two bundles. The first bundle was the basic payment scheme, and the second bundle was environmental stewardship. And they each equated to about half the support they received from the government. The basic payment has gone, and now we know that agri-environment schemes, so these environmental stewardship schemes, comprise about 60% of a hill farmer's income. And if you can't apply for the scheme, then you haven't got access to that income. And the reason why this is really important is because these areas produce public benefits in buckets. So they produce nature, biodiversity, natural flood management, carbon storage. And if we don't have these benefits properly funded, then we won't receive them. It's a bit like saying if you don't pay the librarians, you won't have a library. Similarly, if we don't look after our countryside and invest in our countryside and these very special areas that are the jewels of England, then they won't be looked after.
You've been in talks with the DEFRA and the RPA about this for a couple of years now. It's not new. What is your reaction to their inability to come up with a solution? Because that's what is new. They've told you that they're just not going to do it. They can't do it.
The norm for Commons has been to do most of these applications offline. What's disappointing is that at this year, a decision has been taken not to do it offline. There's been a sort of obsession with digital by default. So we were surprised that DEFRA have not made the decision. And where a group of organisations are writing to Minister Eagle, to ask her to review this decision and make sure that offline applications are possible. It's good for the nation, it's good for farming, it's good for local economies, and it's good for nature. We're only talking about 250 applications because commoners work together. It's not an unreasonable request to have an equitable system so that all farmers in Britain, particularly those working and looking after the most precious landscapes, have access to public money for public goods.
Julia Aglenby from the Foundation for Common Land. DEFRA, which oversees the Rural Payments Agency, sent us a statement saying, "We recognise the importance of bringing common land under these schemes and are looking at how we might enable applicants to do so as we further roll out the sustainable farming incentive and countryside stewardship higher tier agreements. We will be working with stakeholders, including the Foundation for Common Land, to further develop proposals over the coming months." And that's all we've time for this morning. I'm Kaz Graham. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.